You're tuned in for another deep dive, and today, well, we're getting into something that's probably way closer to home than you might think. Microplastics. Specifically, the ones making their way inside our bodies. We're looking at what a recent overview suggests about how much accumulates over a lifetime.
Exactly. We've been digging into a synthesis, basically, of 20 different studies. It was put together by Wellness Pulse, their health research platform, UK and US based, and the Daily Mail reported on it.
Right.
And, this isn't just about finding a few tiny particles here and there. It's more about the, well, frankly, surprising amounts we might be carrying.
Surprising amounts. Okay.
Yeah, and what that could actually mean for our health, down the line.
Huh.
So our aim today is really to unpack this for you, keep it clear, keep it engaging, and maybe skip some of the super dense science jargon.
Okay, good plan. So let's jump right into those numbers then, because you said surprising, and I gather this is where it gets, well, maybe a bit startling.
It really is. Wellness Pulse estimates that by the time you're just 10 years old, 10, you could have already ingested something like 6.3 pounds of microplastics.
6.3 pounds, that sounds like
Right.
a lot. How much is that, like, visually?
Well, but to give you a sense of it, think about picking up one of those small foldable lawn chairs. That's roughly the weight.
A lawn chair. Inside a 10-year-old. Wow, that's a strong image. And not exactly comforting, and I assume it doesn't just stop there.
No, it keeps accumulating. The estimates suggest that by the time you hit 40, that number jumps up quite a bit. We're talking around 25 pounds.
25 pounds. Okay, what's that comparable to?
Think about your standard household recycling bin, the blue one. Full. That's about the weight they're estimating.
A full recycling bin, just inside you by middle age? Goodness. And, okay, fast forward to, say, age 80. I'm almost afraid to ask.
Yeah, it gets pretty wild. The report suggests that by 80, the total amount of microplastics you might have ingested could be enough, theoretically, to build a medium-sized canoe.
A canoe. You're kidding.
It's not kidding. And maybe to put it another way, over your whole lifetime, the amount that actually sticks around, accumulating in your organs and tissues, it could be roughly the same amount of plastic as you'd find in nearly 3 of those big 1.5-liter water bottles.
3 whole bottles, just
Yeah.
sort of distributed throughout our bodies. Okay, I think many people assume this stuff just, passes right through.
Right. And a lot probably does.
But this research suggests, what? That enough actually stays behind to be a potential problem.
Precisely. That's the key takeaway. The Wellness Pulse review looked specifically at studies measuring these tiny particles, remember, smaller than 5 millimeters in actual human tissues.
Okay.
And what's really striking is just how widespread they found them. These studies detected microplastics in our blood, and get this, in 17 different human organs and tissues.
17. That sounds like, well, like almost everywhere. Did,
Yeah.
did they find like hot spots, areas with higher concentrations?
You did, yeah. Some really critical areas popped up. We're talking vital organs, the heart, the brain,
Oh,
also
nice.
the reproductive system. But interestingly, the levels they found circulating in the blood were much higher, about 43 times higher than what they detected in the brain tissue itself.
43 times higher in the blood. Wow. Why would that be?
Well, it kind of makes sense if you think about it. The blood is the transport system,
Yeah.
right? It's circulating everywhere,
Yeah.
potentially picking up these particles from, wherever we're exposed, what we eat, drink, breathe.
Right, the delivery network. So that much circulating in the blood, that definitely makes you think about the circulatory system itself. Does the report link this to specific health concerns based on where they're finding them?
It does. Because finding them in these specific places leads researchers to ask, okay, what might they be doing there? So for the blood, for instance, there's concern about interaction with blood vessels.
Okay.
There was a significant study published in a major journal, the New England Journal of Medicine. It looked at people who already had atherosclerosis, that plaque buildup in the arteries.
Right.
And it found that individuals who had plastic particles actually embedded in the plaque in their carotid arteries.
Yeah.
Well, they were over 4 times more likely to have a heart attack or a stroke or even die within about 3 years.
4 times the risk just from having plastic in the plaque. That's a really strong association.
It is. It suggests the plastics aren't just passively sitting there. They might be part of the disease process in the artery itself.
Okay. And what about the brain? You said levels were lower there, but they were still present. Any links being suggested?
Yeah, the overview mentions potential connections being explored between microplastics in brain tissue and higher rates of things like strokes and dementia. The exact how isn't clear yet, obviously. I mean, the brain has the blood-brain barrier for protection.
Right.
But The thinking is maybe these tiny particles can still find ways across, or perhaps inflammation caused elsewhere affects the brain. It definitely needs more research.
Absolutely. And you also mentioned the reproductive system. Specifically, testicles had the third highest concentration. What are the worries there?
That's right. And this connects to a study from earlier this year, 2024, published in The Lancet. It looked at male fertility.
Okay.
It involved over 100 men from fertility clinics in China. And the findings? Well, they suggested that higher exposure to microplastics correlated with basically worse semen quality and lower sperm counts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And what's really striking is that every single participant in that study had microplastics in their body, often like 3 to 5 different types, including ones commonly used in things like nonstick pans.
Every single one. That really gives you pause, especially thinking about fertility trends. And the placenta was mentioned too, obviously crucial for fetal development.
Exactly. Finding microplastics in the placenta is a major concern. The worry is potential interference with how the fetus grows and develops, which could, raise the odds of things like premature birth or low birth weight, or possibly even developmental issues later on.
It's quite sobering thinking about the potential impact on the next generation already. The overview didn't stop there, did it? Lungs, liver, even eyes.
That's right. For the lungs, inhaled particles are being linked to respiratory issues. Think asthma, maybe pneumonia, allergies.
Makes sense if you're breathing them in.
Yeah. And in the liver, there's a potential connection being investigated with fatty liver disease. Even our eyes aren't totally immune. Exposure can happen through things like contact lenses or maybe contaminated eye drops. The specific health effects there are still pretty unclear, though. More research needed.
Right. So lots of potential links, lots of areas of concern. But it's really important to stress, isn't it, that this overview is highlighting associations and concerns, not necessarily definitive proof that microplastics cause all these things directly.
That is a crucial distinction. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The evidence is definitely building, and animal studies and this emerging human data strongly suggest potential long-term impacts. But establishing that direct cause and effect, that requires more rigorous long-term studies. We're not quite there yet.
Okay. So we've got these tiny plastic bits building up, potentially pounds of them over a lifetime. They're showing up in really vital parts of our bodies. And there's this growing cloud of concern about health effects. But how? How are we getting so much of this stuff inside us in the first place?
Well, the report points to the main ways. We eat them, we breathe them in, and possibly some through skin contact, though that's less understood.
Ingestion and inhalation seem like the big ones then.
Definitely. And the problem is microplastics have just infiltrated pretty much everything in modern life. They're documented in our food supply, in drinking water, both tap and bottled.
Right.
They shed from synthetic clothing. They're in dust. They leach from kitchenware, food packaging, countless household products. It's quite pervasive.
It really feels like you can't escape it, does it? I think the report mentions studies suggesting basically all Americans now have microplastics in their bodies.
That's what the indications are pointing towards, yeah. It's become ubiquitous. And the implications might go even broader than just specific organs. There's research looking into whether microplastics can act as endocrine disruptors.
Okay, what does that mean exactly? Endocrine disruption.
It means they could potentially interfere with our hormones. Mimic them or block them, which can throw off all sorts of bodily functions.
Right, like messing with the body's signaling system.
Exactly. There's also evidence suggesting they might contribute to chronic inflammation throughout the body and potentially increase risks for things like metabolic disorders, maybe cardiovascular disease beyond just the artery plaque issue, and even potentially damage the skin barrier.
Okay, so if we try to sort of boil it all down, this deep dive into the Wellness Pulse review reported via the Daily Mail, it really paints a picture of, well, significant microplastic accumulation happening inside us throughout our lives. We're talking potentially pounds of this stuff ending up in pretty critical places like our hearts, brains, blood. And there's this growing unease backed by early studies about what that might actually mean for our health long term.
That sums it up really well. We're constantly exposed. These particles are getting into places they really shouldn't be, and the scientific community is racing to figure out the full consequences.
It certainly gives you a lot to chew on. And I suppose, given how completely widespread these microplastics seem to be, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What can even be done? What sort of individual choices or maybe more realistically, bigger societal shifts might be needed to tackle this level of exposure and its potential health fallout? It's definitely some food for thought and maybe a prompt for everyone listening to look into this a bit more themselves. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.